All right, well, y'all care about this here. Thank y'all for having me, and appreciate the invitation and the introduction. You can usually tell just how important the speaker is by how long the introduction goes. So the longer it goes, the less important the speaker really is. Because if you think about like what's the shortest introduction you ever heard for a speaker, right? Ladies and gentlemen, President of the United States. That's an important guy. They have to keep going on and on and on about the bio and what you did and all that. She's really just trying to convince you I know what I'm talking about. But I appreciate y'all having me. I'm Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty Institute. She mentioned we are a nonprofit law firm and think tank, and we only deal with one issue, and that's religious liberty. That's the only kind of case that we litigate. It's the only issue that our think tank does research about. That is our sole mission. So we are headquartered in Plano, so not too far from here. We have a small office in DC. We have our legal team has about, I think, 14, 15 lawyers in-house that work full-time for First Liberty. That's if you include me. I'm the best kind of attorney that kind of doesn't really practice law anymore. So I leave the litigating to the litigators. I get to do fun stuff like this. I get to talk to you fine people. My job is to translate legalese into English. So I do, speaking events like this, I do some press. I help kind of get our name out so that people know to contact us if something happens to them. But we've got, like I said, about 14, 15 attorneys that work full-time in-house for First Liberty, but we have a network of attorneys in private practice all over the country who volunteer to work with us. So that's how we can take a case anywhere in the country, even though we're headquartered in Texas. If you look at probably any list of say the top 50 biggest, most powerful law firms in the country, you'll probably find a volunteer attorney for First Liberty in most of them. So that benefits in a lot of ways. Like I said, we can take a case anywhere in the country. We always have kind of the local guy as local counsel who's got sort of the local knowledge. And these volunteer attorneys donate their time for free. So no client at First Liberty ever gets a bill. So if we represent somebody, they're never charged for the services. Like I said, we're a nonprofit. We're supported by generous donors around the country. So the Volunteer Attorney Network lets us take cases anywhere, expert legal advice, legal representation for the clients for free. And a lot of these volunteer attorneys, they may, like if we go into a courtroom and, somewhere up in Montana, they have probably never heard of First Liberty Institute. But if the biggest law firm in the state has one of their partners sitting there at the council table with us, I guarantee you they've heard of that guy or that. So it gives us sort of almost instant credibility also. And then, like I said, they're really good litigators. So we win a lot. Okay, if I leave you with anything, it's like there is hope. Okay, I know you see all the stuff on the news. I'm going to talk about some of our cases you may have heard of. We just got a decision, one of our cases today, so I'll give you an update on that. But there is hope. During the last year, during the pandemic, we have not lost a single case on the issue of religious liberty and government restrictions due to COVID-19. Every single case we do, we won. Okay, and that started all the way back to filing the very first case in the country that dealt with it. It was in Kentucky. Back remember when it was just 2 weeks to slow the spread or to flatten the curve or whatever? We filed the very first case in the country and won, and it was important to kind of set the tone because as much as this word is overused in media today, it really was unprecedented. Okay, for this type of pandemic. And how is the government going to balance? They have a legitimate interest to protect public health, but what is the purpose of government? All right, the founder said it very clearly. The purpose of government is to protect the God-given rights of the people. And the very first one in the First Amendment is religious liberty. Right, so the government's obligation in everything they do, during the pandemic, it should have been to balance those two. People of faith were willing to take reasonable precautions, but they answer to an authority much higher than the government. And that authority wants them to gather and worship. So government, your job is to protect their right to do so. As the restrictions on things started lifting, or churches started getting more creative, we had a client, a little church in Greenville, Mississippi. They were doing parking lot church. People just showed up in their cars. The preacher was outside, I think with like a bullhorn or just a really loud voice or whatever. Some churches and other places, they would do it like on the AM radio station so they could tune to that station. This little church was doing that, and the police showed up and were writing. There were more police cars in the parking lot than there were church goers, and they were writing tickets to everybody parked in the parking lot. And the pastor was talking to one of the officers. It's like, you know, they're not even getting out of their cars. They're not even rolling their windows down. He's like, I'm the only one out here. There's nobody within 6 feet of me. We are within everything the CDC is saying. And don't we have, you know, we have the First Amendment right, you know, freedom of religion. And one of the officers actually said to him, well, those rights have been suspended during the pandemic. So we heard about that, and our reaction was about like yours. It was something along the lines of, well, we'll just see about that. And we did, and they reversed course pretty quickly. So COVID kept us very busy with those types of issues all over the country. You know, that was Mississippi. The first one was in Kentucky. The governor of Washington, you know, I think he had some executive order where he basically said you couldn't, like, I challenged him on this and actually did it just to see if that's really what he meant. Two individuals sitting in their own front yards, you know, no offense between them, but they wanted to have a Bible study, and he was like, no, you can't do that. You know, so we challenged that, took it to court, like, you didn't really mean this, right? And because if so, there's going to be, you know, and he backtracked on that, and people could have Bible studies. But so COVID has kept us very busy. But prior to COVID, and really throughout the pandemic, because I don't know about y'all, I'm really tired of talking about COVID.
Yeah.
Okay. Amen. So I'm going to talk about our other kind of cases, right, that have been going on through this whole time, and the kind of stuff that we did prior to and we're continuing to do. So the first two clauses of the First Amendment, Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of a religion, the Establishment Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Those are the first two in the First Amendment. So on the Establishment Clause, we won a case, I guess it was almost 2 years ago now, at the U.S. Supreme Court. The case is called the American Legion versus the American Humanist Association. And the subject matter of that case was a nearly 100-year-old World War I memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. It's known as the Bladensburg Peace Cross. Now, going all the way back to right after World War I, these Gold Star moms whose sons did not come back from World War I wanted to put up a monument for their sons. Now, you know, 19-teens, early 1920s, transatlantic travel was not common or affordable, so they didn't know if they would ever see their son's actual graves. So for this monument, they wanted the monument in the shape of a cross so that it would resemble their son's headstones if they were buried over here. Our client was the American Legion. The American Legion originally donated the property for the monument. Okay, so to honor the American Legion, they put the seal of the American Legion in the center of the cross. And they raised the money privately. They built the monument, and it sat there not bothering anybody for many years. Around the late 1940s, maybe early 1950s, as DC started growing and getting bigger, they were expanding a highway. Ironically enough, I think it's called the Veterans Memorial Highway. But this highway was going to come right through the area where the monument was, and they didn't want to disturb the monument, so the highway then, the way they did it, just basically curved around it on either side. So in that process, the state of Maryland, the eminent domain, took control of the property that the monument sat on. Still, like I said, late 40s, early 50s, still didn't bother anybody for another 50 or so years. Until the American Humanist Association sent some people to drive by and get offended and file a lawsuit to tear it down because, according to them, having a monument that includes a religious symbol on government property violates the Establishment Clause. What's the Establishment Clause really about? Okay, the founders, people who wrote it, had just finished winning a war with, at that time, the greatest empire in the history of the world that had the Church of England, the official state church. You were taxed to support it. Didn't matter if you believed what they were preaching from the pulpit. Didn't matter if you ever darkened the door of a Church of England. You're an English citizen. You're supporting the Church of England. They didn't want that here. They did not want there to be an official church of the United States of America. And that's really about it. Okay, it's actually pretty simple. It takes lawyers and judges to complicate these things, right? But over time, lawyers and judges have complicated these things. And so much so that to the point where government, in many cases, goes so far out of their way not to violate the Establishment Clause that they actually end up violating the Free Exercise Clause. It's the very next thing, right? Okay? So, and that's the next case I'll talk about is really a good example of that. But, so the American Humanist Association sued to tear it down. We represent the American Legion. We won that case at the district court level, which is the trial court level of the federal courts. And so they appealed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. And at oral argument in front of the Fourth Circuit, one of the judges asked, couldn't we just chop the arms off the cross and then it wouldn't be offensive anymore, and then that way the monument can stay there? So, we heard that question and figured, we're probably going to lose at the Fourth Circuit if that's the way this judge is thinking. And we did, but we appealed to the United States Supreme Court. Now, what's important to remember is that the Fourth Circuit, had the Supreme Court not taken this case, and we won, the Fourth Circuit's opinion would have been the law in the Fourth Circuit. That monument would have come down. Well, what else is in the Fourth Circuit? Arlington National Cemetery. So, Humanist Association could have took that opinion and marched into Arlington. Said, well, Canadian Cross of Sacrifice has got to come down. Argonne Cross of Sacrifice has got to come down. While we're at it, let's sandblast the word God off the tomb of the unknown soldier, and then we can have a conversation about all these individual headstones that have religious imagery, right? So we appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Thankfully, they took the case. And it was pretty interesting at an oral argument in front of the Supreme Court. When you argue in front of an appellate court, you get a certain amount of time to make your case. And usually, you get maybe a few minutes into it, and the judges just start interrupting you with questions, basically trying to draw out the weak points in your case, right? So we had a very good appellate lawyer, volunteer counsel who argued our case. Humanist Association had their attorney there, and during the Humanist Association argument, she had done a pretty good job, I think, of kind of avoiding this, and then one of the justices actually finally kind of pinned her down. Like, if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that there's a religious symbol anywhere on government property that violates the Establishment Clause. Yes or no, basically. Do I have that right? And basically kind of pinned her down to it, and she said, yeah, and that's basically it. When she said that, a couple of the justices kind of looked around the room because there's a Ten Commandments monument in the Supreme Court chamber, right? That's the moral foundation of law. That's what it's there to memorialize. And so, the people in the room sort of chuckled just like you did, even though you're supposed to be very somber. So we sort of liked our chances, when we heard oral argument. Now, when you get a chance to argue something in front of the Supreme Court, number one, it's rare. Because they vote on what cases they're going to take, and they don't take many. So you have to make the most of it, right? So on the Establishment Clause, there is an old Supreme Court case called Lemons versus Kurtzman. Okay, and I'm not going to get too down in the weeds of legalese, okay? But judges and lawyers, ever since that case was decided, I think about 30, 40 years ago, pardon the pun, I've been trying to make lemonade out of lemon ever since. Okay, it's a three-part test that judges are supposed to use to evaluate whether something violates the Establishment Clause. Okay, and it became a test that almost nothing could pass because the language in it is subjective. Like it talks about, does this, whatever you're arguing over, does it give the impression of excessive entanglement with religion by the government? Well, what does entanglement with religion mean? And then if you can define that, what's excessive entanglement with religion, right? I mean, you see how it basically became in the eye of the beholder, whoever the judge was. And almost every time they applied this test, whatever was being challenged was thrown out as a violation. So it became this test nothing could pass. So our goal when we argued in front of the Supreme Court was twofold. One, to protect the Bladensburg World War I Memorial. You know, at the very least, we wanted the court to say this does not violate the statute. But we also argued this test you've been using for I think 40 some odd years has created more confusion than it ever solved, and you should get rid of it, and you should return to the original text of the First Amendment. And so we argued the case, and then you have to wait on the opinion to come out, right? And you wait. And typically what the Supreme Court does is, whichever case was, you know, maybe the most controversial, that's usually the very last opinion they release at the very end of the term, and then they all go on vacation, right? And so, sure enough, I think it was almost the last day of the term that opinion came out. And around the office, we thought, you know, if it comes out and it's, say, 6-3 or 7-2, you know, it's a big win, then we probably didn't get everything we want, because that would mean you got a couple of the more liberal justices to come along with the 5 sort of conservative justices. Now, if it comes out as 5-4, then it's a straight split. I mean, maybe we did get everything. So when it came out, it was 7-2, and we were like, oh well, at least we won. You know, at least we protected it. We started reading the opinion. It was Justice Alito who wrote the opinion. And he actually got Breyer and Kagan to come along with him to say, you know, and the other 5, to say that no, this doesn't violate the Establishment Clause. And they went on to say that they came right up to the edge of just saying Lemon is bad law, don't ever use it again. They criticized it so much, a lower court judge would be foolish to ever apply Lemon ever again. Because, well, so what they said was, basically, going forward, that any monument or symbol or practice that is in keeping with the history and tradition of this country is presumed constitutional. So, again, pardon the legal pun, that's a monumental shift in the way the court analyzes these issues. And it's frankly, you know, it's probably the biggest win on the Establishment Clause in 40 years. So we've already seen the results. There was a monument, I think it was in South Carolina, in front of the police station. It was like a police officer, memorial to police officers, and it included like the police officer's prayer on the monument. It had been removed. This decision came out, they put it back.
Amen.
Wow.
So there was a county, Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, I think it was. Their county seal had different symbols of the history of that county, one of which was a cross of the religious history of that county. It was being challenged, saying you got to take that off. The opinion came out because it stays. You know, so that's probably our biggest win on the Establishment Clause, right? And hopefully going forward, it will really clarify this.
Way overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, where the opinion sort of got a little interesting is the Breyer and Kagan kind of peeled off on some of the opinion as to whether or not, if somebody put up a brand new monument and it included religious imagery, would that be okay? Breyer and Kagan weren't sure about that, but you still had 5 that said it's not the age of the monument, it's whether or not the monument is in keeping with ageless principles, right? So, and then my favorite part, who's my favorite justice, Clarence Thomas. Justice Thomas wrote a concurrence, which a concurring opinion is basically saying, I agree with the majority opinion, but I also think this, right? Like we should have said this too, or some other issue. And he wrote a concurrence that said, you know, while we're at it, getting rid of the Lemon test, we should also get rid of offended observer as standing to bring lawsuit. And he pointed out, it's like the Establishment Clause is the only area of the law we allow this. In every other area of the law, for you to sue someone, you have to prove you've been harmed by them. Now his point is this: just being offended by the sight of something should not give you standing to sue to bring it down. You know, in our terms, I mean, if you drive the highways around here and look at some of the billboards, you can find plenty of things to be offended by, right? But I don't ever go out and file a lawsuit to have them tear down that billboard. And you know, the Humanist Association should be able to do the same. So there, and I think it was Gorsuch joined him in that concurrence. So there's at least 2 votes that we know of on the Supreme Court to get rid of offended observer standing. So we'll take a run at that maybe if we get the right case and the right facts or whatever. We are defending a brand new 10 Commandments monument in Arkansas on the Capitol grounds. which is really just sort of enforcing that opinion, making sure that it's adhered to. So that's a big case on the establishment clause. And unlike a lot of lawyers, I'm not in love with the sound of my own voice. So I'm going to try to be brief and wrap, and then take questions because I want to hear from y'all. Okay. Free exercise clause, the very next one. Like I said before, government has gotten things out of balance to where free exercise clause it's almost become dormant. It's become really hard to win a case on just free exercise grounds. So the case we just got an opinion in today, you might have heard of, is Coach Joe Kennedy, who was a football coach in Bremerton, Washington, right outside of Seattle. I say was because he was fired for going to the middle of the field, the 50-yard line after football games, and taking a knee and saying a silent prayer after football games. Okay. That's what he was fired for. Why did they do it? Why did they tell him to stop doing that? And then Coach made a commitment. Coach is a Marine. Okay, he spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, and he got out, and he wanted a way to help kids who have a rough childhood like he did. He felt like God gave him the opportunity to be a football coach, and he made a commitment to God before he ever took the job. And he said, if you bless me with this opportunity at the end of every game, win or lose, I'll go to the middle of the field and I'll thank you for the opportunity to do it. And so when they eventually told him you can't do this, Coach's response was, like I said, Coach is a Marine. But you know what? You do what you got to do. I got to do what I got to do. And he took the knee, he said the prayer, they suspended him, and then did not renew his contract, which is, as you know, educrat for your fire. So, but why did they tell him he couldn't do it? Because they told him they thought they were afraid that this would somehow violate the Establishment Clause. So when I tell you, government was going so far out of its way to not violate the Establishment Clause that they end up violating the Free Exercise Clause, that's exactly what I mean. Because that was his right as an individual citizen to exercise his faith, to live according to his faith. And in the Free Exercise Clause, that's exactly what it means. Okay? It means living according to what you believe in all aspects of your life. And you'll hear people sometimes on the other side of this issue or on news shows when they're debating, you'll hear them talk about the Free Exercise Clause, and they'll talk about, well, yeah, you have a right to worship, and they call it the right to worship. Well, that would confine religious liberty to just maybe within the four walls of the church or even between the ears, of the believer. That is not what the Free Exercise Clause is about. You don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be a constitutional scholar. Just look at the semantics of the phrase, the Free Exercise Clause. This is maybe the only place in the entire English language someone will try to get you to go along with the idea that exercise means belief. I mean, you think of it this way. If all it took for me to have six-pack abs was just to believe in my heart that I have it, I would have it. Okay?
Yeah, right.
I don't, because it requires a certain amount of activity to get them that I am not willing to do. Like if I lay off fried catfish, that I'm going to finish that plate. Okay? The word exercise implies activity. Okay? And that means in all aspects of your life. And just because he works for a public school, he does not shed his First Amendment rights when he walks onto the football field. Okay? So, but we had to take, when we took his case, and then, you understand sometimes, in certain areas of the country, when I talk about judges, and you hear people talk about liberal judges and conservative judges, they're not really talking about their political views, they're talking about their interpretation of the Constitution. So somebody with a conservative interpretation of the Constitution, basically, it says what it means what it says, and if there's any question, you go back to what it meant when they wrote it, and that's what it means. Okay? The more liberal view of the Constitution is it's a living document, and it can evolve to mean something different today than it meant in 1789. If it can mean something different today than it did yesterday, then it's meaningless tomorrow. Okay? Because then it's just in the eye of the beholder, and then we're ruled by men, not by law. Okay? In that area of the country, right outside of Seattle, not exactly the buckle of the Bible Belt. Okay? Not exactly the most churched area. Okay? But no one ever complained about what Coach Kennedy did. That was his practice for 7 years. It was a compliment from another school about what he was doing to his school that even alerted the district as to what was going on. And so, this is just kind of the world according to Watts. Like any good bureaucrat, somebody beneath you gets a compliment, you must launch an investigation, right? What is going on here? That's what started it on, was a compliment. No one had a problem with what Coach was doing.
Wow.
So we took his case, lost at the district court level, went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which if you follow courts at all, the Ninth Circuit is typically considered the most liberal court in America. Although I will say the Fourth Circuit is giving them a run for their money. And the Ninth Circuit ruled against us, and in their opinion, it basically said that that a public school employee or a government employee who engages in religious activity, and anyone can see you do it, then you are somehow assumed to be speaking on behalf of the government, and that would be an endorsement of religion by the government, and that would violate the Establishment Clause, and so, Coach, you can't do this, right? So we appealed that to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, this was, I think, about a couple of years ago now. Now, as I said before, the Supreme Court gets a lot. How many, just in a typical term, ballpark guess, how many cases do you think get appealed? So we got 100 back there?
A couple thousand.
A couple thousand? Anybody else want to guess? If there's any lawyers in the room, don't spoil it. Typical term, it's usually between maybe 7,000 and 8,000 cases get appealed to the Supreme Court.
Oh, I thought you meant how many cases.
No, that's totally fine, because that's the next question. So every week they're in session, they meet usually on Monday. The 9 justices are in a room by themselves. They have a list of cases, they discuss those cases, and they vote on which cases they want to hear. And if 4 justices vote to take the case, it goes on the granted list. If it doesn't get 4 votes, it goes on the denied list. So we appeal to the Supreme Court. The odds are against you. They take anywhere from maybe 70 to 80, it's about 1%. Okay. So then we just had to wait, and every week we would look. It was listed on the conference list, so we knew they were going to talk about it. And then we'd wait, for the granted and the denied list to come out. And they relisted it several times, so they discussed it several times. And then finally one day it comes out, it's on the denied list. They didn't take it. So we were all pretty bummed, but we noticed that there was basically an opinion that they published about why they didn't take it. That is extremely rare. When you're denying 7,000, 8,000 cases, you do not have time to explain why you didn't take it. Okay, they almost never do that. So that was one thing that was already interesting. This little opinion comes out, written by Justice Alito, and joined by Thomas, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. So there's 4 names on it.
Wow.
Right? Now 4 votes to take it, it's on the ground. So that's already interesting. There's 4 names on this. Well, then we started reading it, and it basically said, technically I think it was a concurrence with the decision to deny the writ of search warrant. And it basically said if we took the case as it is right now, on the record that there is right now, there's some questions of fact all the way back at the district court level that we don't really think were answered clearly enough. And if we took it right now, we'd likely get bogged down in a really fact-specific ruling. And that's not what you want the Supreme Court to do. You want them to answer the big First Amendment question, right? So then they went out of their way to criticize the Ninth Circuit's opinion. That we find their opinion, I think it was extremely troubling, I think was the phrase they used, which that's about as sassy as the Supreme Court gets when they're talking about another court. And then right at the end, I think it might have been actually the very last sentence, it says, this case was appealed on free speech grounds when the petitioner, Coach Kennedy, clearly has a free exercise claim. Perhaps you didn't bring the free exercise claim because of previous decisions by this court, which we have not yet been asked to review.
That's an invitation.
And it's exactly, yeah. So let me translate these for you, okay? The reason we filed it as a free speech case is because of an old case by the Supreme Court called Employment Division versus Smith that lowered the bar for government action when it impacts free exercise to the point where it's almost impossible to win a free exercise case. So Justice Alito, in this little last sentence, that's him basically doing everything. That case is called Employment Division versus Smith, And that's basically Justice Alito kind of including an eye wink emoji saying, we would like a case to take care of Employment Division versus Smith. We know that's why you didn't bring the free exercise claim. So we used that little opinion, kind of our playbook for Coach Kennedy. So we went back to the district court. We got the factual issues they were concerned about clarified on the record. But that district court judge is still bound by the Ninth Circuit's opinion, so he rules against us. So we went back to the Ninth Circuit, argued that about 2 months ago, and just today, the Ninth Circuit issued its opinion. And I know you're all shocked. They ruled against him again. But that clears the way for us to now go to the Supreme Court and say, hey, you remember us? You know, remember those guys that you said you'd like a case to maybe take care of Employment Division versus Smith? Here we are. Here you go. We're back. Yeah. So even though we would have loved to have won for Coach Kennedy today when that opinion came out, because this has been going on for
2 or 3 years.
6 years, I think. You know, it's not easy to be a client of First Liberty's. You know, of course we wanted to win for Coach. But at this point, and Coach understands this, at this point, it's bigger than him. And he knows that, and that's the only reason he's willing to keep going, and to keep going through this for all these years, because he knows if we get it to the Supreme Court, and they rule in his favor, not only is he vindicated, if they get rid of Employment Division versus Smith, then everybody's rights are safer. And even if they just handle his case, every government employee, all school districts, counties, cities, federal, state, no matter what it is, will have more religious liberty than they do right now.
Amen.
Right? That's why he puts up with this for all of these years. So there's hope, is my message, right? Yes, we would have loved to have gotten a win today, but we understand when it gives us the opportunity now to go back.
How long do you think it'll be before that goes before the Supreme Court?
Well, the first thing we have to decide is when you're in front of a court of appeals, the case isn't heard by all the judges. You get a random draw of 3 judges and they hear your case. You have the option, if that three judge panel rules against you, you have the option to ask for what's called an en banc review. It's basically you ask all the judges from that circuit to hear the case again. So we have to decide first, do we want to ask the entire Ninth Circuit to hear it, and give the Ninth Circuit a chance to get it right, or do we want to go just directly to the Supreme Court? So since we just got the opinion today, I haven't heard from the litigation.
You're wasting your time if you go back for this.
Well, we'll see. I mean, of all the judges that President Trump got nominated and confirmed, and he got a lot, right? I mean, you all know that. He narrowed the margin in the Ninth Circuit to where I think it's 16-13 now. If you count up, there's 16 judges that were appointed by more liberal presidents and 13 by more conservative presidents. So your chance, even in the Ninth Circuit, is better now because you get that random 3-judge panel. So I tend to agree with you, and if I had to predict, don't hold me to this on camera or recording, I had to predict, we'll probably just appeal straight to the Supreme Court. But that's a decision for the litigators and Coach, and what he wants to do. Those are probably our 2 biggest cases going on right now. We do have one other case that you may have heard about. Aaron and Melissa Klein owned a bakery in Oregon. The state of Oregon bankrupted their business with the largest fine ever imposed by the State Bureau of Labor and Industry because the same-sex couple asked them to custom design a cake. They referred them to another baker, and the state of Oregon fined them $135,000, bankrupted their business. And the fact pattern is very, very similar to the Masterpiece Cake Shop case out of Colorado that you might have heard. So we went through the state court system in Oregon because it was a state agency that did it. The state Supreme Court in Oregon ruled in favor of the state, and we appealed that to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did what's called grant, vacate, remand, and it's basically grant, they take the case, vacate, they basically just erase the lower court's opinion, and remand, they send it back to them like, hey, you want to try this again? And they probably just stapled the opinion from Masterpiece Cake Shop, which was almost the exact same facts, and sent it back to him. I think you should do this again. We re-argued that case, and it is now going on a year, waiting for the Oregon court to give their opinion. I think they don't want to give their opinion because they know they're bound by the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, and they don't want to give an opinion that's going to be a victory for the Kleins. But eventually, they'll publish an opinion. And if it's a win for the Kleins, hooray for them. If it's not, we'll go back to the Supreme. We handle cases in a lot of different subject matter. Okay, public schools, churches and ministries, like I said, during COVID, but other types of issues too. We represent a little church in, I think it's Duncanville, where the city was going to take their property via eminent domain because they wanted to expand the fire station, even though there's plenty of other property available. So, cases like that. So churches and ministries, public schools, the military, we have handled a lot of cases where we actually had to defend military chaplains who were, a couple of them were facing, the end of their careers, court-martial, for just doing what they're supposed to do. They're chaplains, right? Those cases are baffling to me because the chaplain corps actually predates the First Amendment. One of the first general orders of George Washington for the Continental Army, before there was a United States of America, was to establish the chaplain corps. Okay, so I seriously doubt that the founding fathers would have had an army with chaplains in it, and then gathered to write the First Amendment and write it in a way that makes what that chaplain is doing somehow illegal or unconstitutional. But we've had to defend chaplains in the military a lot. And then sort of the fourth big category is just kind of in public life, right? People just trying to live according to what they believe, find themselves in trouble because of it. We'll defend people all over the country, any faith, anytime, as long as that person is just trying to live according to what they believe in a way that's in keeping with the law and the Constitution, we'll defend the right to do so. Okay? And that's our mission. That's all we do. So I would like to take questions for as long as somebody just give me the hook. But before I do, right on the back table there, I brought some postcards. If you like what you heard, you want to hear more about our cases, you can fill one of those things out, put you on our email list. We send out a newsletter every week. We don't spam you to death, but you'll get a lot of updates on the case. And those are right there at the back. You can just give them to me before you leave. So, question?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Have you had any reports about from Trump that you should be able to do that thing with the Supreme Court? I know you have to go to court first before you go to the Supreme Court, but in some serious problem, which is this one of the worst ones we've had, that there are so many people illegally doing things that for the election, which is one of the most important things in the country right now. Okay? Why would they not take him in and listen to him?
That's a question I'm unqualified to answer, to be perfectly honest with you. We didn't have anything to do with the election lawsuits because the only issue we litigate is religious liberty. I can speculate. Judges are human. They're imperfect people. They are subject to the same sort of temptations and peer pressure that we are. And I think Justice Roberts, in particular, is extremely sensitive about, quote, the reputation of the court. And I think some of the decisions he makes or cases he takes or doesn't take are impacted by it. But that's my freshman Psych 101.
You thought he would be better.
Right. Yeah.
Got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Under the Establishment Clause, help me understand something here.
Mm-hmm.
All the removal of the monuments, and how is this even possible? I mean, this is all established by history, by founding fathers, and it's just like people, I'm offended, they go, they file it, the city, the county, whatever, don't want to find it, and they remove it, and it's just like, you're getting rid of our history.
Yeah, I think some of it, as I said, it does, it kind of takes lawyers and judges to complicate something as simple as the Establishment Clause, but they have, and so in some of our cases, especially sometimes like the schools, if it's a public school issue, that school board typically has a school board attorney, that they consult with on a lot of things. And anybody in here school board attorney or married to one or related to one? Okay. They sometimes know just enough about First Amendment law to get themselves in trouble. okay? And they think that their mission in life is just keep the district from being sued. So if somebody complains about something, shut it down, because that'll keep us from being sued, right? And then we have to come in and try to convince the school board that the attorney that they listen to on everything is wrong. You know, and I have to say, actually, if you do that, you know, if you tell this kid he can't do this, if your goal is to not get sued, bad move, because we're going to sue you, right, on behalf of this student, because he has rights or she has rights, or the teacher or whatever. So sometimes it's just a misunderstanding of what the law requires. Sometimes, frankly, it's people with an agenda. You know, one of the very first cases that I helped with at First Liberty when I started about 4 years ago was and we see these every year during graduation season. I guarantee you, here in a couple months, we'll have another case like this, where a valedictorian is told he or she can't mention their faith in their valedictory speech because, well, that might violate this establishment. The law is settled on that. It is not, that person is not speaking on behalf of the district. That is that kid's speech, not the district's speech. And so there is no violation of the establishment clause. If you're that worried about it, you slap a little disclaimer on the program that says all the comments by the speakers are theirs and theirs alone, do not reflect blah, 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 blah. Right? So either they don't know or they have an agenda. And that was one where it was a new superintendent and a vowed militant atheist. They had never had a problem with this practice before. And that superintendent came in, and now all of a sudden it was a problem. So, you know, we got involved, and it's no longer a problem. But that's kind of a long answer, but I think that's really what happens in a lot of.
It just seems like everything now with society, the way it is that if you voice your disagreement or you're offended by any way, shape, or form, the louder you get, the quicker somebody's going to back down.
And that's important. Yes.
Instead of standing up and go, time out.
Yeah, that's an important point about the First Amendment, because I make these, I write a lot of op-eds for us and other things, and I always come to this point is, look, it's the unpopular opinion that needs the most protection. Yeah. That's what the First Amendment is about. Yeah. Okay, and right now, at this moment in American culture, the traditional religious views on many issues are culturally unpopular. Okay, that's what the First Amendment, if it means anything, it's that just protect the people whose views are not that popular. Because, and this is the case I always make when I talk to some of my more libertarian friends or on a college campus or something, and you know, not speaking to people who are particularly religious. And I always say, the reason you should care about religious liberty, Thomas Jefferson called religious liberty the right of conscience. That's how he referred to it. And that's, if you're not particularly, you know, a religious person, that's what it means to you. Okay, you still have some set of ideas you want to live your life by, and you have the right to. For people of faith, it's informed by their religious views. If you're not particularly religious, it's informed by something. Maybe the way your parents raised you, Jordan Peterson, Kim Kardashian, I don't care. You know, actually, if it's Kim Kardashian, I do care. But the point is, you have the right to live accordingly. You know, and what is it that today, right now, that you believe in that's okay with the culture, that 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, or when your kids are grown and you've raised them to believe this, is not going to be okay anymore? That's why you should care about these cases, you know, that we're filing. Whether or not you agree with the Kleins on the issue of marriage, everybody should be against the government bankrupting a private business because they don't like the religious beliefs of the business owner. Mm-hmm. Right? Would in a place where they are, in Oregon, would the free market not have fixed this problem? Right. If that's your goal, is to keep anybody who believes in the traditional view of marriage from ever being able to enter the wedding industry, then the market would have fixed it. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as it hit the press, they were protested, they got death threats. I could read you things that would curl your hair about some of the things comments that they got. They'd have been out of business anyway. Right? Now, if they did that here in Texas, would they be out of business? Probably not. That's the market, right? He didn't need government to do this. Since really, I mean, on a lot of these issues, like marriage and gender and all of these things, really, what it comes down to is you have two groups of people with very, very different opinions on things who need to find a way to reasonably coexist, right? And what the Kleins did, what some of these other cases on these issues, what they did was try to find that reasonable middle ground. Okay, the clients didn't say, we don't serve your kind here. They said, we can't be a part of your wedding. Okay, we can serve you on other occasions. You know, want us to do a custom birthday cake, we can do that sort of thing. But we can't be a part of your wedding ceremony. Okay, that should be the reasonable middle ground, right? You don't go to the government to try to force us to violate our own conscience.
Right. We
We won't ask you who you're sleeping with if you come in to order muffins next week, right? That should be a way for people to peacefully coexist, but it has not been enough for the other side. They just will not allow any sort of dissent. Yes, ma'am.
Lathan, we're probably gonna have to close pretty soon, but I have a question.
Yeah.
The Equality Act is
Right.
supposedly it's gonna be voted on soon.
Mhm.
Is that gonna cause problems with the Supreme Court? I mean, if it's law, are they going to, they
Right.
can complicate matters for religious freedoms, for instance?
Okay, so the reason that Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act back in the 90s was because of a Supreme Court decision that I talked about earlier tonight, Employment Division versus Smith, where it lowered the court's bar of scrutiny so low. So the proper response from Congress, if you don't like a decision by the Supreme Court, is take action. That's what they did. And you want to know how far we've come? The Religious Freedom Restoration Act was sponsored in the House by then Congressman Chuck Schumer, passed almost unanimously, carried in the Senate by Ted Kennedy, and signed into law by Bill Clinton.
Wow.
Okay? The Equality Act would essentially erase the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It would gut it. It would make sure that it does not apply. And the hope that there is, if they do that, they say they pass the Equality Act and RFRA goes away. But the Supreme Court takes our Coach Kennedy case and gets rid of Employment Division versus Smith. The court's level of scrutiny is back to where it was. The reason they passed RFRA was because of the court decision. So you would basically be back, kind of back to where you were. And I personally don't think the Equality Act can survive that level of scrutiny from the Supreme Court. So you asked me, what time it is. I'm telling you, out of the clock. I realize that, but it's complicated. Okay. Yes, the Equality Act is bad for religious liberty. It tolerates no dissent on the issues related to sexuality, gender, all of those things. And again, that's what the First Amendment should be about, protecting the unpopular view.
Ms. Sean had a question earlier. You still have it?
Was there a miss a question?
I just wonder, do you see God in all this?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I see God. Yeah,
I just,
This is the world according to Watts, right? I absolutely do. If I didn't, I wouldn't do what I did, right? I do what I do because I got 17 to 15-year-old daughter. Okay, and someday they're going to stand, God willing, they're going to stand when they put me in the ground, and I want them to say that He did everything He could. And it's because I believe religious liberty is first in the First Amendment, because if you lose that, you will lose everything. Because if you allow government in the space between man and his God, if you allow government to force someone to do something that in their mind endangers their immortal soul, what limit is there on government? I mean, will they think twice about taking your guns away, the Second Amendment, quartering troops in your house, the Third Amendment, searching you without a warrant, the Fourth Amendment, depriving you of life, liberty, without due process, the Fifth Amendment, make you test. Just pick your favorite of the Bill of Rights. It will go. And I do believe. Look, I'm a Christian. The thing that comforts me is there is no government on earth, in the history of the earth, that can stop the gospel of Jesus Christ. It cannot be done. Okay? The Roman Empire couldn't do it. China's Communist Party can't do it right now. One of the fastest growing Christian populations in the world is in China. It's completely underground. If they can't stop it, nothing can. Right? But I do this because I believe in the concept of stewardship. And I believe Christ tells the parable of the talents. That tells you you're going to be held accountable for what you did with the blessings God gave you. And it is a blessing to live in a country as free as we are. And therefore, we have a responsibility to take care of it. So it is almost a uniquely American Christian question as to how you do that. Our government's founded on the idea that you as a person of faith, whatever that faith is, should never be put in the position of having to choose between obeying the government and obeying God. Right? And so, yes, I see God in what I do, or
would not do it.
Thank
Now,
you.
he doesn't need me, Jesus doesn't need me, okay?
But he will use it.
But as imperfect a vessel as I am, I'm at his service. You know?
One quick question.
Okay.
Okay, Trump took those things to the courts he's supposed to, and they would not bring anything in because there was no evidence about, illegally doing that. But you have people in one place that everybody that was dead got a vote. And that's one. Then in one place, Nevada, there was 2 votes for every person. So is that not enough law, enough to see to make it?
I'm not qualified to answer that question.
You are?
I'm just not.
I'm sorry.
It's just an area of the law that I
You're
don't
so
know.
good in everything else.
I don't know enough about the area of election law, but, you know, there's election lawsuits in every election cycle. I can tell you that from my work that I did before. Firstly.
Question, the Church of Satan has filed suit in the state of Texas to be able to practice abortion as a religious right. How is that going to affect things?
We'll see.
They won't do that. I'm sure they won't make that.
They actually joined, I think it was the Satanic Temple of Arkansas, were some of the people that brought the suit to bring down the Ten Commandments monument at the state capitol of Arkansas that we're defending. And it's sort of a tricky business because you really don't want the government deciding what is a church and what is not a church. Because you give a government that sort of power, they will eventually come at your church. Right? But they don't really meet most people's definition of a church. Now, so like in the issue of the Ten Commandments monument, they will usually, sometimes they'll have like a satanic temple say, well, if you put the Ten Commandments monument up, we want our monument up too. Right? If you let them have one, you gotta let us have one. Well, the Ten Commandments monuments in general, when they're put up, especially from legislative chambers, they're put up as a reminder of the moral foundation of law. It's one of the oldest written moral codes in the history of the world, right? And it's there to remind legislators about the morality inherent in law. And the worship of Satan does not enjoy that sort of historic connection to American jurisprudence. So that's typically how you can keep the Ten Commandments monument and not have to put up the Baphomet statue right next to it. That specific issue in Texas, I'm sorry, I don't know enough about it to really give you a qualified opinion. But we'll see. We might end up, I don't know if we'll end up involved in that or not. I feel like I've overstayed my welcome, but I'll take questions as long. I don't want to keep it so good. If you filled out one of those cards to get on our email list, I will take them from you and make sure that you do, so you can get more information. And I'll hang around if people want to ask questions afterwards. Just all I got to do is drive back to Louisville.